Now turning to California, and the way in which we do our California forecast is we take the US forecast and think about what is different, not what is different about California, but what's happening in the California economy that's different than the US economy. And today our theme is to focus on building housing in a zoning constrained economy. So I want to focus my remarks on housing prices in California. We all know they've been going up. And how that affects our California forecast. And just to start out, this is from Tanya Stumhauser. She's a video producer and blogger. And her website is budgetandthebeach.com, kind of an interesting website, but this says how to afford living in LA. I'm going to show you a slide at the end, which I think is her solution to that. But what I want to do to talk about housing and the ability of California to grow is focus on four things. One is where are home prices today, so we can know the lay of the land. Employment and household formation. So as we get increases in employment, that generates income. That provides the basis for household formation. New households demand housing. And will housing ever be affordable in California? So that's certainly an open question. And then what role does NIMBYism play? We hear a lot about NIMBYism. We have a panel today that's going to discuss a lot of the things that I'm going to leave open in this, because I want to focus on how does this affect the forecast for 2018, 2019, and 2020. So to begin with, and then we're going to go to the forecast, and throughout I'm going to talk about risks to the forecast. But as David said, the biggest risk to the forecast for California is the risk to the forecast for the US, international events, and trade policy. So to begin with, I plot here on this graph the FHFA Home Price Index for California, and it goes all the way back to 1975. And it's plotted on logarithmic scale. Okay, so now you're saying, oh no, I forgot about logarithms. The thing about logarithmic scale is that straight lines represent constant rates of growth. So where you see something moving in a straight line, it's growing at the same rate throughout. And so that's what's kind of neat about this. And if you look kind of from left to right, you see it's California home prices increase, and then we hit the 1980, 1981 recessions, kind of a little bit of a correction. We get into the late 1980s, increases again. 1990 recession, which here in Southern California was fairly severe with the aerospace contraction, a correction. Then we get to the speculative bubble in the millennium, a correction, and then over on the right you can see home prices increasing today. But what I want to do is dig a little deeper into that. Back in 75 to 81, home prices were rising at 17% per year. And so what happened in 1978? Prop 13. No surprise, 17% per year. At that time, the property taxes were tied to the market valuation of your home. So your property taxes were going up at 17% per year. And people remember that, and that's why Prop 13 is the third rail of California politics. But then you get this correction, and then in 86 to 90, it's 15% per year. And again, a correction, and 15% per year if we go all the way back to 2002. Of course, it accelerated in late 2005 into mid-2006. And moving over to today, 8% per year. So on a historical basis, the increase in home prices that we see today is lower than those that we've seen in these expansion periods since 1975. And then the other thing to read out of this chart is we didn't get any corrections to these increases in home prices that were more rapid than today until we hit a recession. Our forecast is that we're not going to have a recession this year. We're not going to have a recession next year. This is the 3-2-1 forecast. So don't expect these home price increases to then abate, that we're going to somehow get a correction in the next year or so. So one more thing on this. If you look over on the right and kind of move your eye horizontally, for California as a whole, we're not above the speculative peak of 2006, 2007, but along the coast, that's not true. So this is the Case-Shiller home price index is for 3 cities in California: San Diego, Los Angeles, and San Francisco. And those represent a little over half of the population of the state. The chart is set to 100% for the peak in 2007. So as the line drops below 100%, those are home prices that are lower than the peak. But where are they today? Everywhere along the coast, we find that home prices are greater than they were in the previous peak. So the picture is, which we kind of knew intuitively, but the data is telling us that housing is less affordable today than it was during this kind of madness that was happening in 2006. And one of the reasons is we are at record employment. The 2 lines here represent the 2 measures we have of employment. The top line is total employment, so it's the number of people employed. It comes from the household survey, and it includes those who are self-employed, and that's 9.4% above the previous peak. It's 16.5% above the depths of the recession. The bottom line is payroll employment and number of jobs, and that is 10.2% above the previous peak and 20% above the depths of the recession. We have record employment is generating income, generating demand for housing. That's why you see that 8% increase in home prices. Another way to look at this, and David talked about running out of people. So if we run out of people, then we kind of have less pressure on home prices. The red line here is the unemployment rate coming down steadily. The blue blocks are monthly increases in payroll jobs in California. And so you expect that to be diminishing as we run out of people. But what we find is that in 2015, it was in the 40,000s. 2016, 30,000, unemployment rates coming down. 2017, still right around 30,000. Unemployment rates coming down. Unemployment rate in California, 4.2%. So that's about full employment. Last month, 40,000 jobs created in California. David talked about we're at about 200,000 nationally. That makes 20% of US jobs. And California is only about 12% of the population. So people are somehow materializing in the labor force, obtaining jobs. That's fueling the demand for housing. Another way to look at this, because the unemployment rate is kind of notional, right? They ask you, did you look for a job? And you can say yes or no. Depending on your circumstances, you might not correctly represent that. But another way to look at this is payroll employment as a percentage of the population, of the working age population. In the US and California, there's a long-run downward trend. A downward trend that is explained at least in part by boomers aging out of the workforce. But if you look over on the right-hand side, in California, we're moving steadily and fairly rapidly back up to where we were in 2007. So something's going on here that doesn't seem to be consistent with full employment constraining the rate of job growth in California. And just to kind of firm that up, we've got job growth everywhere in California. The rust brown block here is the US, and these are the regions of California, and everywhere except for Los Angeles that has some unusual churn in the job market, we're growing faster than the US. But the important thing to look at to try and understand what's going on is all the way over on the left-hand side, Silicon Valley. Silicon Valley, unemployment rate under 3%. It grew in the last 12 months in terms of jobs, 3.5%, more than double the US rate. Silicon Valley, high home prices, Silicon Valley, full employment, and it's still growing at more than double the US rate. So how can that be? What is happening there is that people are moving in and people are moving out. And what we see is that the constraint on the labor force is not the same as the US in California. Jefferson, which was always over on the right-hand side, has now started growing faster than the US. About half of that is in the Emerald Triangle. So that has a bit to do with new California laws. Okay, so home affordability job growth paradox. So we've all been reading about people are leaving California because home prices are high, right? Home prices are too high, it's unaffordable, people are leaving. But why then do home prices keep going up? If people are leaving, demand is going down. I took Economics 101. If demand goes down, prices go down, but prices are going up. And also, what we've just been talking about, why is job growth stronger than the US if people are leaving? Okay? So that's the paradox that we have to deal with here in the data. And the answer is that successful places attract more demand for housing than supply, particularly when the supply is limited by building restrictions and land use restrictions and zoning, which is the kind of situation we have today in the subject of our conference. And to kind of get a handle on this, I want to first look at what's happening worldwide and then focus on the US. So worldwide, there are a lot of ways to think about what are successful cities in the world, what are the kind of the best cities, and you can measure this, for example, by demand from international students. You can measure it by the economy, by cultural amenities, by natural amenities, lots of different ways, but kind of no matter how you measure it, you come up with a list of maybe about 15. And I took an average, and here are the 10 that came up in my average, starting New York, London, Tokyo, Paris. None of these are big surprises, right? Seoul, San Francisco, and Los Angeles in blue, Boston, Chicago, and Washington. And what you see here is the cost of housing relative to income in each of these cities relative to the cost of housing, again, relative to income, in Austin, Texas. That is how much less affordable or more affordable they are than Austin, which is a nice city, a vibrant city that's also now starting to contend with with rising home prices and congestion. But New York is 3 times less affordable. London, 5.5 times less affordable. Tokyo, 3.5 times. San Francisco, 3 times less affordable. The only one that is more affordable that's below 1 here is Chicago. And Chicago is a city that has a lot of positive attributes, but there are also enough negative attributes not counted here that people are in fact leaving Chicago, which may give you some insight about the Amazon HQ2 decision here. But the point is, successful cities don't seem to have affordable housing. Let's look at the US and try and unpack this a little bit. The dots that you see here represent each of the 100 largest metropolitan statistical areas in the US, plus about 5 in California that didn't make the top 100. The California ones are in red. The rest of the US is in blue. The affordability index on the vertical, the higher up you get, the more affordable. So at the top, we've got Youngstown, Ohio, and Toledo, very affordable cities. And down below, we have New York City, Silicon Valley, that's SV, Fresno, and Los Angeles way over on the right. And the horizontal axis is an index from the US Department of Agriculture, and it's on natural amenities, which counts topography, so mountains and hills, water sources, oceans, winter mean temperature, summer mean temperature, humidity, all kinds of natural amenities. And what's striking here is as you move from left to right, you get more natural amenity-rich cities and less affordability. And there's some exceptions, New York, not a lot of natural amenities, but still not very affordable. It has lots of cultural amenities. So there's a lot that's not counted here. But the California cities are not too far off of this line that kind of represents the way in which natural amenities affect prices. And if you think about it, it makes sense, right? Natural amenities like our beaches and weather are valuable. How do you purchase those? You purchase it by living here. How do you live here? Well, you have to demand housing. And that increased demand for housing to purchase these natural amenities is built into the cost of housing. But you might look at this and say, yeah, but that's maybe a little phony, because people who live in really nice areas They want to keep everybody else out, kind of pull the ladder up, right? I made it, so let's close the doors. So what I did was take an index of building restrictions. This comes from Wharton and Professor Giorco. Building restrictions that include zoning and other building restrictions. Expand each one of these dots so that the larger the dot, the more restrictive we find housing in that city. And that's going to be the next chart. And not surprising, over on the right in California, lots of building restrictions. But as you move your eyes from the red to the blue, from right to left, you find that there are also a lot of very large dots on the left. Right? So there are a lot of cities that are relatively affordable, but have lots of building restrictions. Now, what that means is not that the building restrictions don't affect supply and affect price, but they're not the only thing. There's a lot more involved, and our panel today is going to discuss a lot of these issues. To be sure, a lot of the small dots are on the left. But as you move up here, again, Youngstown and Toledo, Ohio, they're really affordable because people don't want to live there. They're moving out. Right? So if you want an affordable city, one way is to have a failed city. But there are other ways maybe to have affordable cities or more affordable cities. At any rate, what this suggests is that affordability is a really difficult problem if you live in a place like Los Angeles that is very attractive not just to Angelenos, but all throughout the US and the world. So the implication for the forecast is that at least as we're looking at the next 3 years, even if our panel solves everything today, housing unaffordability is going to be here to stay. But demand is such that building's going to increase even though interest rates are going up, even though in the US, as David showed you, building kind of turns over as we get into 2020 because we have such high demand for housing in California and a turnover of population as people move out and people move in. One income earner families find that this really isn't affordable. These are the human interest stories, and they move out. 2 income earner families move in, or retirees finally can cash out and live off of their accrued equity. That we get a turnover in population, so full employment is not the constraint for California as it is for the US, right? Because we can have population movement between states. Now, to finish up and show you a couple of slides on housing, this relates to one that David showed you, the number of residential permits, and it goes all the way back to 1970. And you can see we had big swings in these permits, and over on the right, we're not nearly up to our historical average, which is about 14,500 per month. We're just pushing up to about 10,000 per month. And in our forecast, that's about where we get. We get a little higher than that. So the pressure on home prices makes it profitable for builders to build, and we're expecting continued increases in building and a 21% increase by the time we get to the end of our forecast. So that brings me to the forecast. Payroll employment growing at 2.2% this year, then falling to 1.7% and then to 0.8% as the economy kind of slows down, and we will reach some constraints in our labor force. Good growth in personal income and housing starts, so this is new housing permits, getting up to 140,000. It's not the 180 that we need for our population increase, but we're getting closer at least. So let me finish up, going back to budgetandthebeach.com. I think this is the way that she learned to live in Los Angeles on $31,000 a year. So that's obviously a lifeguard tower, and I suspect that down at Dockweiler Beach, she was in a sleeping bag under that. And so that finishes the California forecast. Thank you.